Hello and welcome. As the title says, I'm going to be talking about Masters Shanghai and at least one storyline or question for each team in the tourney. So to start off, I'm going to talk about the obvious. That's PRX and lesser so Gen G, and if it's finally Pacific's time to get a trophy. As everyone knows, PRX have been good for a while, but they can never finish out. They got third in Madrid, they were second at Champs, they got third in Tokyo with the sub. They're always right there but have never been able to take that final hurdle. Going into Shanghai, PRX are the favorites. They look like the strongest team out of every region, but again, they've never been able to make that final step. Now Gen G, they're similar to Paper X. They look really strong. They've had a bit of a tumble recently, but they recovered at the end and they made it to Shanghai. But just back in Madrid, they got second place. This seems to be the story with the Pacific region, and so their main storyline is if they can finally do it. Now the next storyline I want to bring up is between FPX and Foot. Now I know that's a weird combination, but both of these teams in specific do something that I'll keep an eye out on, and that is their experimentation with comps. Most teams play fairly meta, maybe have off-meta comp on one or two maps, but these two teams love to experiment, and that's not always a good thing. Foot beat Fnatic on Lotus with a weird comp, and people were still trash-talking Foot and their comp. People seem to be worried that because Foot won with a weird comp, they'll think it's a good comp, even though maybe they were just playing a Fnatic that weren't at their strongest point. The same goes for FPX. I personally haven't watched too much China, but you can look at VLR. They play a lot of crazy comps. They're always off in the meta. I'm pretty sure they're the ones who played Clove. And on top of all this, Foot and FPX play each other in the Swiss stage. So that'll be a very fun match to watch. I think it's a lot closer than many people seem to think. I think FPX do have a chance to beat Foot, even if they're not favorites. Now my next storyline is about Ascension teams. It's about G2 and DRG. Can they prove it at an international stage that they belong there? I think even getting to Shanghai, they've proven that they deserve their spot, but especially with how the rules go where they'll be relegated in 2 years, I personally think the worst teams in the league should be relegated and it shouldn't be placed on, like let's say next year G2 win champs, but then they're relegated. So you have your world champions playing in tier 2. It just doesn't make sense, and I don't think that's how it should work, and we'll see if they stick to this rule when it comes to relegation in a year, but we'll just have to look at that. So that's the storyline, with teams that can be relegated proving that they deserve their spot. So my next storyline is specifically for Team Heretics, and that comes with their sub. If you haven't heard, Miniboo is not going to be playing, which is a big hit to the team. Even though Patatek is a great player, Miniboo is just one of those one-of-a-kind players. On top of this, Woot, who just recently joined the team, and they went on their big win streak until they lost to Fnatic, Woot's going to be playing Duelist. Even if they're not as good, that's going to be fun to watch. Woot is like their secondary Duelist. He'll play Reyna on Icebox, I've seen, but as a main Duelist, we'll have to see how he does. I think they'll still be a great team, but obviously they're going to be weaker than they were. Now I've mentioned them, but I want to talk about Fnatic. Everyone knows they've had a wacky season. They didn't make it to Madrid, and then they had a rough group stage. They only went 3-3. They were able to eke it by in the rounds. They made it to Shanghai, and then they got 2-0'd by Heretics. But they went from looking like the third strongest team, if even, because they lost to Na'Vi. They got lucky playing against Team Liquid. No offense to Team Liquid fans. And then they turned it around. They were able to beat Foot, and then they even beat Heretics at full strength with Miniboo. So the question for Fnatic going into this is if they will play at their best. Fnatic this year have a completely different narrative than last year. They're no longer the we'll beat every team by a ton. They're now we'll come back and beat your team. We'll be down 3-11, we'll be down 3-9, and we'll come back and win. So Fnatic are going to be a team, I feel like they either bomb out or they go really far. Like I feel like there's no in between for this team. Now next I want to move on to Leviathan. Of course their big storyline is, are we going to get the Leviathan that's Aspas and friends? Or are we going to get King shooting, Mizzino, Aspas? Of course Aspas is going to be Calm, Tex, you know? As an NA fan, it hurt to see Calm and Tex not doing well at the beginning, but they stepped it up at the end. They turned it around. Leviathan became what they should have been at the start, but then they faltered a little bit. They lost to G2, but I still feel like they're a strong team. Of course, if they want to make any waves in this tournament, it's gonna need to be Aspas and Leviathan, not just Aspas and friends. Next up is 100 Thieves, and their big question is if they are the real deal. They really look great. They're a tier above of every other NA team currently. Now the question is if they can carry this momentum into Shanghai. They're definitely not the favorites going into this tournament, even though I'd say they're probably top 3. The sentiment around the Americas region right now is that they are not nearly as strong going into this tournament as they did for Madrid. Americas have looked like the third best region. So the question for 100 Thieves is, can they prove they're not in the third best region? Can they prove that they belong? And then they can make waves. This is their first international since Champs 2022, where they made an LCQ. And they've already made it further without playing a game because they've got the automatic bye being the first seed. Now I also want to talk about China, specifically EDG and FPX. will they be able to finally break that hump? Will they get past the 6th to 8th barrier that's been hurting them? They've had some good wins in the past. If you'll remember, EDG 2-0 Loud last year, but then they got destroyed by Loud this year in Madrid. So the big question, will the home crowd of China be able to back them? Will they be able to make it further than they ever had? Way less likely will they be able to bring China their first win, their first tourney. It would be crazy to see China bring home a trophy before Pacific. But now there's more chances. Now that FPX is basically as good as EDG, they go back and forth. EDG got them at the end in the finals, but FPX have beaten EDG a good amount of times this year. So the question is, how far can they go? And really the question is for who's the number one in China. Now, moving on to DRG, I mentioned them with G2 if Ascension teams deserve that spot. Their storyline is not being last. Now that sounds mean, but let's be honest. As I said, China is just a weaker region. Their Valorant scene is newer. And DRG got destroyed by EDG and FPX. Like, they're just on a tier below them. And their question is going to be, yeah, as I said, can they be not last? If they could beat, sad to say, T1, maybe. I feel like T1, other than the other China teams, is the most likely they could beat. And this really hurts because I'm a T1 fan. I don't think they'll beat them, but. So my final storyline is specifically between T1 and G2. Both of these teams made it to Shanghai despite many people believing they are not part of the top 3. Now this is especially for T1, as T1 were able to beat Gen G, and then Gen G took out DRX. However, T1 played Gen G again and got destroyed. Now some copium on my part. Saya player did not have a good series, which is pretty uncharacteristic from him. Now G2 as well. Obviously there's a lot of Sentinel fans out there. We're like, oh, they're just burnt out, which, let's be honest, is pretty true. Sentinels are a good team. They played against an ass pass who dropped a kill record against them. They played against EG when they were playing their best Valorant. I personally think Sentinels got unlucky, but this video is not about them. But I also think that G2 are a really good team, and despite Icy not being able to perform that well, they've proven that they deserve their spot. But the storyline here is if they can prove that to all the doubters. Now that's personally the storylines I'm looking forward to watching. Let me know if there's any you believe I missed. Any games you're excited for? I personally am really excited for Shanghai. Again, this video's rushed because I had the idea to do this a day before. But yeah, let me know if there's anything I missed. Comment who you think is going to win Shanghai. I think it's T1. They're going all the way. They won't drop a map. But thanks for watching.